Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you this morning.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you this Monday morning?
Ready and ready to go. we're fine. It's easy to find the news that's disturbing, but we're going to find something. The worst thing that could happen, the most difficult way, if it's really, really, really bad, what I turn around and say, oh, that'll wake up a few more people, and things will change. But anyway, we'll do our best to be as objective as possible. And that means we have to swear off television and everything else because you can get confused where there. But anyway, there's a lot of talk about the presidential race and the speaker's race and just who's telling the truth and when all these problems are going to be solved. And there certainly is a lot of discussion on foreign policy having something to do with, finding a speaker. And this is something that's been going on, and we have a solution to that. Just have a non-interventionist foreign policy, then you don't have to have 16 different factions telling you how to operate your foreign policy. You just stay out of other people's business, mind our own business. But anyway, the interesting thing this weekend was Biden got interviewed, and he was interviewed by a very, very challenging interviewer and making sure that they got all the truth out. But the most quoted statement that came from Biden was that we have an obligation. And when you say an obligation, that always infers a moral obligation. It's not a constitutional obligation. It's not a social obligation. It's a religious obligation for some people to do in foreign policy, but his is sort of vague on purpose because is to stir up, well, if we're obligated to do it, we have to do it. So therefore, we're going to not want to be called unpatriotic. And so Biden says we do have an obligation in spite of the fact that we might have to deal with more than one problem. I mean, they're working on Ukraine, but it's sort of slowed down a little bit. It's not going downhill quite as fast, but it's still a mess. So now they have, in addition to that, we have what's going on, with the wars that's going on, the obligations that we have now to settle the Middle East. What's the obligation there? Well, I think that's what Biden was referring to. We can not the two elements fighting in the Middle East, the two elements of the Ukraine war and the Hamas, that war that's going on. Oh yeah, those are two little, and we can take care of that. That's no problem. Of course, he should be taking care of a more about who has an obligation and what is the responsibility of the American people to the people who are constantly fighting, and that's the challenge. But I see that the problem is interventionism, which means it's arbitrary. There's no firm principles based on that, and it vacillates. It goes back and forth. It isn't saying, well, you ought to be a free country, and we're going to encourage you. We will talk with you, we'll trade with you, and try to set an example. But we're not going to get in there and settle your disputes and your fighting. And of course, ever since the governments, international governments, all the way back to the League of Nations, they've stirred up trouble there, and it's led to this. These were predictable events, even a good while ago, because I think you cannot try to understand the Middle East and the current effects in the Middle East without going all the way back to 1917, and it systematically got worse. So after World War II, it's always somebody. We have the answer. We know how to remake the Middle East. And I think George Bush even talked about remaking the Middle East. Well, what they do is they just make a bigger mess out of it, and I don't think it'd be too far removed from reality. That's what we're having now, a mess in the Middle East that was preventable.
Yeah, well, Biden was on 60 Minutes, and they gave a warning before the segment aired. They said, well, the president's very tired, and he's been managing all these crises, basically don't expect too much. And that was probably a wise warning. Put this first one on because this is Steve Watson covering it. We got this via Zero Hedge video. Biden says U.S. has, quote, an obligation to be involved in wars in Israel and Ukraine. As you rightly pointed out, Dr. Paul, we don't hear much about Ukraine anymore because the Israel-Palestine situation has blown up over the past week. And people are wondering, are they going to get more money in Ukraine? Well, we got to give some money to Israel. Well, we got to give some money to Taiwan. And the president says, don't worry, we got this. Let's. It's like a kid who took his dad's credit card and took all his friends out drinking. Let's listen to this clip from Biden. If you want to put your headphone in, Dr. Paul. Here he is explaining how we got this, no problem.
Are the wars in Israel and Ukraine more than the United States can take on at the same time?
We're the United States of America, for God's sake. The most powerful nation in the history, not in the world, in the history of the world. The history of the world. We can take care of both of these and still maintain our overall international defense. We have the capacity to do this, and we have an obligation to. We are the essential nation, as to paraphrase the former Secretary of State. And if we don't, who does?
I mean, it almost looks sad, Dr. Paul, when you watch that, because clearly we are the essential nation. We can handle everything. We can manage everything. He's clearly having a difficult time managing his own self and his own presidency. It just sounds like an empire that's in decline. I could imagine someone like Brezhnev or Chernenko being interviewed. Will the Soviet Union last forever? Of course it will. Of course it will. We are strong. That's the feeling that I got when I watched it.
When I was watching that, I thought about a book written about 150 years ago, and it was called Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And when you listen to him, you know, some people might say, well, what else could you expect? But this whole thing that to pass this over and say, oh, we've been great in the past, we've conquered everybody, it's going to last forever, it won't cost us anything because we can print the money. And that is extraordinary, and it's very popular, and what they're really frightened about it, and the military-industrial complex can even turn on a Kennedy, you know, and say, we are in trouble, and we have to really have some strong lobbyists in there to protect at least the shrinking pie in order to be subsidized. So this is something they've been frightened about, and that's why I think there's turmoil, because they don't have a solution, they don't have an answer. It's sort of like, why doesn't the Federal Reserve always have the correct interest rates and make the economy work smoothly? Because they don't have any idea what it is. And they don't know how, if you say, well, what we want is an empire because we have wealth and we have wisdom and we have all the weapons, and but they really don't. The more they get involved in intervention, the bigger the hole is, and the bigger contribution they make to the taking on of our freedoms and our money and our prosperity, and it contributes significantly. And I think that when I listen to him, he sort of had his smile there. This is no big deal. We can do this. But the one thing is, that delusion is probably less popular than he thinks, because it is getting a little softer now that people are sick and tired of, and that's where we saw the break a month ago, you know, with Ukraine. People were getting tired of it.
Well, speaking of the Fed, we had former Fed chairperson and current Treasury Secretary. She was trotted out to give America more confidence in Joe Biden. And I don't know, when Janet Yellen speaks and tells you everything is fine, you better grab your wallet, check your bank account. Let's listen to Janet Yellen telling the world that Joe Biden is in fantastic shape. If you can find that second clip and listen to that one. He is doing well. Let's listen to Janet.
I know you're not backing a woman to be president in the next election, because I know you'll be backing President Biden loud and clear. Does he still have the energy for another 5 years in the job?
Absolutely. He's very involved, very vibrant. is doing an excellent job. And I think when we face the kinds of troubles that we have in the Middle East, you can see the benefit of deep experience and understanding of global issues.
I know you.
He's very vibrant. He's doing a great job. Somehow her delivery doesn't give you a lot of confidence.
She just supported my statement there. Continue with the delusions. So that's our goal. But I guess in many ways, that's what politics is all about.
Yeah.
You know, the propaganda that goes on, and they have to fool enough people to get 51%, and then you become the dictator.
Yeah, yeah.
The dictatorship of the majority, as long as we could pass out the delusional promises.
I mean, when I hear them talk about this, it reminds me of how they sounded before 2008. Oh, that Ron Paul's crazy. Everything is going fine. There's not going to be a crash. You know, those, it just makes you feel that way. But so in the article, we talked about a little bit more. So, of course, we have to do both. We can do both. It's not a problem. And Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, he was talking about it. If we can put that next one clip up. Here we go. Speaking Sunday to reporters in Tel Aviv, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who's leading a congressional delegation to Israel, said he and other members have talked with Israeli leaders about their needs. So we can do this. Here's the article. They heard from Israeli leaders about what is needed, and this is Schumer talking, and in munitions. We heard about precision-guided bombs. We heard about Iron Dome replacement. We heard about 150 millimeter mortars. We heard about JDAMs and many other things. And we also talked about what kinds of intelligence they need and diplomatic help. So they gave Schumer a laundry list, the Israelis did, say, hey, we need to, we haven't quite flattened Gaza yet. We need a few more bombs to do it. Can you send over some 155s? Well, there's going to be a little problem with that, Dr. Paul, because let's go to the next one. This is from back in July when President Biden was interviewed. This is from New York Post, July 9th. Biden lets slip during an interview. U.S. is low on artillery ammunition rounds as it tries to aid Ukraine, sparking backlash. Quote, here's what he said, we're low on it. He's specifically referring to the 155 millimeter shells. And if you remember just a couple of months ago, the U.S. had to ship over cluster munitions packed into a 155 because we ran out of the conventional shells. So we literally gave all our weapons to Ukraine, and now Israel's saying we need to flatten Gaza. Where's the weapons? Nobody knows.
Well, then you combine it with a policy that deals with our own borders, and that means, are we close to having an invasion? I think some people think so. It could be like an invasion. So what do? We subsidize it. We give it. We feed them and take care of them. We take the money out of poor people in this country to subsidize that thing. So it makes no sense. It's a policy that's going overseas, and you think, well, you're a conspiracy. I think they have something on their mind. I think they want to take over the world. If they take it over after they're done with it, there won't be a whole lot left. That's why we have to take it over with or influence it, with the ideas that might bring about peace.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Biden is convinced that we can do all this. We can manage the world, but it's going to take a little money. Let's go to our next clip because this is our item number 2 that's related. This comes from Bloomberg, I think. Supplemental funding requests for aid to Israel and Ukraine could come this week. Now, we don't see Taiwan there, but they may slip in a couple bucks for Taiwan. And I don't know, Dr. Paul, supposedly they're putting together the funding. Biden said it'll be significantly more than $2 billion, which I don't think surprises anyone. But the question is, and you've been following this closely too, we don't have a speaker. The speaker's race is very, very muddy right now. We've had the House Armed Services Committee chairman now go over to Jordan's side, but it's not clear that he has the votes. I just wonder, what do you think is going to happen? I don't know, but they got to get this money through. They don't have a speaker. Is this going to clarify, people's views?
Well, the big question people will be watching is their strategy going to work, because they say, picking sides is really tough in the Middle East because there's more people cheering for Hamas, and it's a mixed deal. So you can't say, well, Israel's responsible for all the mess. We have to bail out and help the Palestinians. But the whole thing is maybe put it together. And the typical thing in Congress, make them vote for something they don't like, and that's how so much bad stuff gets passed. But it'd be interesting to see if the people who are sick and tired of funding over there, so you can't even get a position where, yes, I'm against the weaponry for Ukraine, but not against Israel.
Yeah.
That's not available to you because they put it together to try to blackmail you into doing that. But they have to. What I see happening right now is, we listen to Biden and Yellen, and they're so calm, cool, and they just say, this is necessary and we're doing the Lord's work. But you know what? What they're drum beating for is everybody involved probably has either no religious beliefs or they're different in our country because that's just the way it is. But what they're doing is a political religious zeal that they have, and the whole thing is you're going to get punished if you don't go along with it. You could be canceled, something like that. So that's where the problem is, and you sense that it has to be the propaganda is going to get more and more. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens on this vote when they put the money in for the two countries.
Yeah, I don't see how. Obviously they're putting the two together because they know no Republican is going to vote against Israel money, but they're very hesitant about Ukraine money. And we had Zelensky was asking if he could tag along with Blinken to Israel. I was reading about it today. He said, "Hey, can I come along? Is there a seat on the plane?" And Israel said, Zelensky, just take it easy. We don't need you right now. He's desperate for that limelight. So a lot of Republicans are not going to be that enthused about voting for Ukraine money. But you're right. When you put it together with Israel money, I can't see a Republican voting against it. And I think there's a sense in Congress that this will be about the last tranche of money that Ukraine is going to get. It's very clear after $100 and some billion, after literally all the weapons we have and Europe has, Ukraine has not done well. The counteroffensive has been a complete and absolute failure. We've had, I think, 90,000 Ukrainian men die from June until now in the counteroffensive. Things aren't going to change. We're heading into the fall months where the ground is squishy and you can't really do much. So nothing's going to change in the short term. I think they see that this gravy train is almost over. There's a new gravy train coming in Israel, but in the meantime, you've got to pass as big a package as possible for Ukraine one last time into the breach.
I think the people wanting all this money realize it's getting tougher and tougher. Not only are the people speaking out about it, but it's also that the Treasury is bare, and they know they eventually have to deal with that. But what they're doing now, yes, you read off the list that Schumer to say what military needs are there. That'll still exist. The military-industrial complex is there. But they also know that things eventually will settle down, and they started already. The tragedy of what's going on in Gaza, I think that's stirring up the Palestinians here in this country. So here we've been involved in that type of foreign policy, whether it's Ukraine or the Middle East or whatever, and we participate in and aggravate it, and they come on now. Oh, we're there for humanitarian reasons. There's people, they don't have water and they don't have this. And it's just sickening for me because I think they know darn well they're lying through their teeth. And but they have taken something that there are a lot of people over there, volunteers, and some of them have already been killed, and they're strictly there as honest people to help out the situation over there. And they do have humanitarian instincts, but this is the professionals doing that, and they'll use this. Well, you got to help the people who have suffered from ABC, and then they also get the military-industrial complex saying, boy, did we give away all those good weapons? I think we better rearm.
Yeah, build some more, build some more. Well, it's a disaster, and we'll keep watching. The world is watching. There looks like the Israelis are getting ready for a ground invasion. It's an ill-advised one, according to a lot of the people that we watch, but we'll see what happens. But I guess we'll move on to a good news story, because we need to end on a higher note, particularly when we talk about the dangers in the Middle East of a real escalation. Let's put that next one up. I think this is from, where is it from? Maybe Bloomberg.
Political?
Yeah, Switzerland refuses to take sides in ever more divided world. Now, you and I have been a little bit depressed lately about how Switzerland, who we both admire, I spent a week there as a young leader. Back when I was young, I wasn't a leader, but a lot of affinity for Switzerland. But they have made some boo-boos lately in terms of their neutrality and a gold standard and what have you.
I have told you, I've mentioned it to you, and I sort of bring it out when I think of when Switzerland was different, and the way the government is put together is very similar. And somebody from Switzerland was here, and I said, "Well, who's your president?" He says, "Nobody knows who the president is."
Yeah.
And they have a committee, and they rotate it, and all that. That sounds like a pretty good idea. And the average person doesn't know. How many American citizens would know it? And I look at this all the time. I'd have to go and check the book.
Yeah.
Who's the president of Switzerland?
That's great.
And that tells you what type of system that they have had in the past. It's too bad they don't. And I think there was one little hint that they were talking about gold again, because they were the last ones to go off the gold standard, and the Swiss franc was always the strongest currency.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what everyone wanted it. Well, here's from that article, if we can go on. It looks like they're going to look back to neutrality and start embracing neutrality again. Switzerland's biggest political party wants to double down on neutrality, just as conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East make a non-aligned stance more difficult to sustain. Of course, that's their spin on it. Oh, those dumb Swiss, how dare they? Anyway, the article goes on. The right-wing Swiss People's Party, which is set to win the largest share of the votes in elections later this month, is seeking to collect 100,000 signatures by May to trigger a vote on whether to enshrine everlasting neutrality into the Constitution. That would allow it to roll back sanctions against Russia that won praise from U.S. President Joe Biden. And as you can tell from this little clip, Dr. Paul, it's a very snide article from Bloomberg, as can be expected, that the Swiss are going to embrace neutrality. That's old-fashioned. Like a certain chairman of a certain committee told you, Dr. Paul, that's old-fashioned. We don't do that anymore. Well, the Swiss, it sounds like, are coming to their senses on this issue.
There's been other elections too. Argentina and others. There's been elections that have
Slovakia. No more.
So it's slow and tedious, but it's so much more valuable when the philosophy is changing. But that's why I think they're cracking down more on the First Amendment, because they know that truth is breaking out and their system has failed. People don't get up and chant and say, those Russians, they have problems today, but boy, they were really, really bad. But we endorse what Stalin, but that's over and done with. I mean, they self-destructed. And this is the reason when you hear of one leader and the people speaking out, and that's why we saw hints of the lockdown breaking out, but unfortunately too much has been retained. There are some people who liked all that stuff. They like to be guided and told and made safe. And they really believe continuously there's a large number of people that believe the government's major job is to make them safe, and they're capable of doing it. And exactly the opposite is true.
Yeah. Well, imagine if the U.S. had neutrality, how different the world would be. Right now, we could actually be a broker between Palestinians and the Israelis, because we don't take sides. We can invite them to New York. Okay, guys, let's sit down and hammer this out. Bring in some other countries in the region. But we're not seen that way. We're not seen as being neutral because we've taken sides in the whole thing. So we could do far more for peace if we had been neutral. We would be far richer. We'd be more like the Swiss. We wouldn't have $34 trillion in debt. We wouldn't have flushed $100 billion down the toilet on Ukraine. Everything would be better if we also embrace this idea of neutrality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, some of some of the members of Congress are in conflict about the money going to Ukraine and Israel. What is the solution? I think I know a senator that made a suggestion, and that is, we'll do it equally. We take money from, don't send money to either side.
Yeah, either side.
Oh, that is way too. Just think of how many special interests you're charging when you do that. But the system will run out of steam, and just as the Soviet system ran out of steam. And I always remark that I think the collapse of the Soviet system is remarkable.
Yeah.
Not one tank, because during the Cold War, there was a couple of some countries over near where you used to work where people tried to rebel,
Yeah.
and the tanks rolled in,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then you can't do that at all, and all of a sudden it was over. But unfortunately it hasn't been substituted with libertarianism and freedom, but it certainly canceled out a lot of the violence.
Yeah.
And right now, we know that American people are sick and tired of it. That doesn't mean it's not violent. The fact that we don't send the soldiers there, but what about the policies? So what about the policies is hurting people. If we give the weapons to somebody else and run the show, they have to do what we tell them.
Yeah.
And so once you know they're our weapons, then I say that we're part of the problem.
Part of the problem, exactly.
Or the problem.
Yeah, well, I'm going to close out, I think, if you think we're ready, Dr. Paul. I was just going to mention that I went to the Wings Over Houston air show yesterday. I took my son, the two of us went, we had a great time, watched the Thunderbirds, who I've seen so many times, and I always love to see them. They're so unbelievably terrific. A lot of great airplanes that we saw. But I was walking along and I heard my name, and I said, "What? I don't know anyone here." I turned around. It's a gentleman who says, "I watch the Liberty Report every day. I love you guys. Tell Ron Paul I love him." So I shook his hand. We talked for a little while. He's from Houston, so it's just nice to hear that that the show is getting around. It gives me a lot of energy. He was a super nice guy. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in. I'm going to throw something else in, which is a book. If we go to the very last clip, I'm going to throw in Dr. Paul's book. I think we got about a box left of books. We're going to give these away as a thank you to those who help support our fall fundraiser. We are a 501c3 charity, so you can, to the extent of the law, you can tax deduct your donation to the Ron Paul Institute. I will add a clip on how we can send you either a soft cover or even a hardcover forever book signed by Dr. Paul. His latest book, The Great Surreptitious Coup, Who Stole Western Civilization? We have limited supplies, we have a limited time, because primarily we want to get you these before Christmas, because they make great presents and you're going to want to read them yourself. So back to you, Dr. Paul.
Very good. I'm going to say something as a possibility, but not much of a possibility, but it crossed my mind that would be very tragic. What they're trying to do, I'm surprised that they've waited this long, so there is some ambivalence about what Israel's going to do. Usually it's 24 hours. They've done something. There's something going on there. But they said, we're coming, we're on the borders, and we're going to blast you to smithereens. You better get out of here, and you all need to move south, get south of the river. And I got to thinking, what are they going to do if it's empty? Is there any chance that the Israelis would annex it? Even if it's not annexed, but they've expanded their geography that way. But even if they didn't do it, they have walls all the time. They might say, no, it's too late now. You can't go back home. So they've eliminated the northern part, and that's Gaza. So that's a terrible thought, because it just means more and more trouble. And I don't have any secret insight to what they're doing. But I still am challenged by the fact that the retaliation hasn't occurred, and the threats and intimidations and the pictures of, boy, the troops are there. Tomorrow we're going to march through. So we'll wait and see. I would vote against that program. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.